before the show, before Shan hit record, we were talking for a little bit and then realized we weren't recording, so we're going to go back over it. But you were saying about it being more theatre, which is not necessarily how I would have thought maybe a ritual being, but I could be quite naive and think it's just somebody mixing up some potions in a little
you're so very Protestant in your perception.
That is also a ritual then.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So okay, welcome to the Nordic Mythology Podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, co-owner of the company Hornsvoden, and I'm joined as always by Dr. Mathias Nordvig.
Hello everybody and welcome to the show. This time we are joined by Simon Nygaard, who I like to describe as my evil twin. Simon is an assistant professor at the University of Aarhus University, which is my alma mater. I've had the pleasure of studying with Simon. And he's a specialist in pre-Christian Scandinavian or Nordic religions, and is working or has been working on especially rituals and ritual performance in pre-Christian religion in the setting of the hall, where we know that the cloaked Odin will show up and join us. And aside from that, Simon is also one of the front people behind the eminent black metal band Wulfaz. So welcome to the show, Simon.
Well, thank you very much, Mathias and Dan. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Feel like we already know each other, seeing as we were speaking for the past 20 minutes. But I'm sure, I mean, to be honest, if that's anything by the way the episode's going to go, it's going to be a lot of fun because I'm already super interested. But yeah, I think, like I said, I think we should start with what rituals are, maybe in a pre-Christian sense, because I don't really know.
Well, so kind of keeping it fairly empirical is first of all a hard thing, because we don't have many ritual descriptions from the Viking Age. Kind of symptomatic of the issue is the fact that the best, most full ritual description we have from contemporary time, from the Viking Age, is written by an Arabic trader about people living in what's now Russia. This is, of course, the famous description by Ibn Fadlan of a Rus funeral, a Rus chieftain's funeral. So many of the other descriptions that we have are late, like many of our sources, and then influenced, of course, by Christianity, and that presents a problem of varying degrees to different scholars. I, of course, as an historian of religion, would be out of a job if I thought that we couldn't use the sources for anything. So what we have described there in the medieval sources are various rituals, both what we call public and private rituals, rituals that are performed in a public space or a semi-public space like the hall, and rituals that are performed in the house. Famously, the passing around of an emballed horse penis in northern Norway, reciting poetry to the horse penis, which is called Völsi.
That sounds like my kind of ritual.
Yeah, it is. Well, you're a man, so you shouldn't. You should. That's at least how I read you.
You are correct. You don't need to worry.
Good. And in this particular ritual is pretty much female driven. At least they are more positive towards worshipping in various ways the horse penis. So that's one kind of side of it. And then we have big bloody rituals, horse offerings, offerings of various livestock, and communal meals, which are also a form of ritual. And we also have divination rituals, casting lots and stuff like that. So we have a lot of different types of rituals in the Viking Age.
Before we move on to those, I want to know more about the horse penis ritual. I don't know what that says about me.
Of course.
I don't know what that says about me, but that just seems like a fascinating ritual. It seems
definitely. And what can if we kind of condense it, the lady of the house in a pagan family in northern Norway is visited by a cloaked man who calls himself Masked, and he has two guys with him who are also called Masked, and they are the king of Norway, King Olav the Holy, who Christianized, possibly Christianized Norway and became saint. And he's come to convert these horrible pagans. And the lady of this household keeps a horse penis locked in a shrine, and this horse penis has been strengthened with fabric, special type linen. I think it is linen. Okay. and onions or not spring onions. What are they called? Paw, Mathias.
Leeks.
Those are the ones.
Yes.
Yeah, linen and leek. They even alliterates in English as well, which is linaloik. Is the Old Norse. So she's involved this horse penis, and then during the winters she takes this horse penis out every day after they've had dinner.
After dinner as well.
After dinner, yeah, the after dinner ritual. You don't get an after 8 in northern Norway. You get
an embalmed horse dick.
Yes, exactly. And they then take turns reciting a poem to Wulfaz. And it goes something like, accept this offering, Mørnir, which is a weird name, and the crux of the whole interpretation of this myth, or what we call it, this ritual, is what the hell that means, what that refers to. Accept this offering, Mørnir, and then the females present more or less overtly sexual poems, and the males present poems that kind of give the picture that they would really rather be, out doing
somewhere else.
Okay. Anywhere
but near the penis.
Yes, and of course there is the exception. This is a story called the Thautar, which is kind of an Icelandic short story, and it's called the conversion Thautar, which comes with its own kind of tropes, and one of the tropes is that we often have this proto-Christian pagan person, and this is the daughter of the household, and she is kind of hesitant as well to play her part, and the whole thing ends with King Olav getting the horse penis as the last person presented to him, and he then throws it to the dog. And then the thing kind of abruptly ends because Wulfaz is eaten by the family. And I we talk at length about who or what Mørnir is or are, but that would take us in a very different direction. You can read a good article by Gro Steinsland and Kari Fugt from 81 if you read Norwegian, that is.
Okay. I mean, do we know the purpose of the ritual? I'm guessing it must be fertility, or do we not know?
The standard kind of interpretation is that we're dealing with some form of fertility ritual, either aimed at the Vanir, Freyr having kind of one of his attributes, at least according to Adam of Bremen, is a large penis.
And one of the things that Adam refuses to mention are the
songs,
the songs that he doesn't want to repeat them because they're apparently
shy?
A little too woo. So I think that's part of the theory, right? That
yes, that could be some of the songs that they were singing in Uppsala.
Mm-hmm.
The other possibility is giant women, jötnar, and both would have to do with some form of fertility.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I think the whole jötnar thing is overrated in terms of like, these like very set ideas of like good and negative forces and all that stuff. I think it's a little more mixed than that. So yeah, I think that's a possibility that it's something that it could be a ritual dedicated to something that, you know, a guy like Snorri Sturluson, for instance, would classify as jötnar, right? But might have been something else to those people if it ever took place. There is also that possibility that this is just something that that Describe of Olaf's saga just came up with, really.
Yeah. But then you had Rune Rasmussen on the show a couple of weeks ago, a couple of episodes ago, I think. I don't know, sometime not too long ago. And he told me last time we saw each other about a ritual in Brazil, the Candomblé ritual, which he described as a weird bastard between Wulfaz and a parade, basically.
Yeah, we've had that conversation too, me and Rune.
Yes. So, you know, yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting description nonetheless.
I think, you know, this actually, I use this story in my Vikings class as like one of those situations where I make my students think critically about the source material that they're working with, you know, to the Viking Age, because it's such a good on the fence kind of story. You can find so many historical examples that are very similar to this. Like, just consider all the, you know, Romans parading penises around everywhere. That was a pretty common thing. Well. Yeah, exactly, right. And on the same, all over the place. And in the same vein, you can also criticize the story for being heavily Christianized and even like there to ridicule pre-Christian religion to some extent. That's definitely how I believe the Christian authors of the tale saw the whole thing, right? So it's
definitely.
Two different directions depending on your inclination here.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like you say, it's an interesting story, and I can't believe we've got to 101 episodes before I've heard of the horse penis ritual. I'm a little bit disappointed by you, Mathias, for not letting me know that one a little sooner.
I'm sorry. I'll try to do better.
Okay,
now we know.
Now I'm satisfied with the horse penis. We can move on to we can carry on with, I guess, what a typical ritual would be, or what we may kind of can assume it would be, I guess.
Yeah. So the rituals that I've worked with are rituals that presumably took place in the ruler's hall. So King's Hall, the Chieftain's Hall, a place where people who we could classify as belonging to the elite would gather and do whatever, basically everything. That's how it was in the Viking Age halls. It's basically one room for everything, more or less. And what also, that's what I've argued, is that the performances of poetry that we have descriptions of in the Old Norse sources, some of those performances of poetry had a ritual layer, and some didn't, which is also equally important to say. What I did for my PhD dissertation was look at a selection basically of 5 poems that my co-supervisor Terry hadn't worked with yet, or hadn't worked very much with yet. So there was stuff left to be said about them.
Nice of him to leave you something.
Yeah, definitely. Scraps from the richest the table of the richest. That's not a saying in English. That sounded weird. But
I know the one you mean.
Yes,
It's
yes.
to do with
Good.
rats and the table scraps.
Something like that. Yeah.
I could have made it up. Don't listen to anything I say.
No.
I've heard it too. Can't really reproduce it, but I've heard it. So
well, moving on then. So the poems I've looked at are in a specific meter called Jolderhauter, which is one of the main meters that Eddic poetry is written in. And the Jolderhauter meter means song meter or incantation meter, and it's special in the sense that performances in this meter almost exclusively take the form of dialogue or monologue in the first person. So Fornidislag, or Old Story meter, which is the other main meter, keeps almost exclusively to third person narration. Mm-hmm. And
also I wanted to ask you, isn't it also typically Odin who does the Jolderhauter, like Odin dispensing a bunch of wisdom?
It is often linked to Odin, highly. So what happens when this is performed? If we take these poems and look at them as oral derived poems, as poems that stem from an oral tradition in some form, not necessarily word for word, but the gist of them. If we see the poems as having been performed by actual humans in the Viking Age, that performance would have, that's my argument, been a ritual. Mm-hmm. And the way I look at it is that I use modern ritual theory, which defines ritual very broadly, which also, of course, encompasses non-religious rituals, but religious rituals are ritual acts that stem from a group's tradition and that people haven't made up entirely, and that direct themselves towards gods or the other world in some sense. And my argument is then that this modern ritual theory, I use the ritual theory of American anthropologist Roy Rappaport, and he argues that rituals have consequences for people, and that the performance, what is performed, has the potential to change statuses and circumstances and surroundings. And working with that, I argue that the performers of Old Norse poetry, or at least these Jolderhauter poems that I've worked with, just Grimnismal and Havmal from the part of Havmal from the Poetic Edda, and 3 weird skaldic poems called Hraftsmal and Eiriksmal and Hákonarmál, which are composed to Viking Age Norwegian kings, father and to his sons. And these poems, the performers who performed these poems would have been affected by that which was being performed. Grimnismal is a fantastic example of Odin coming into the hall disguised. He calls himself Grimnir, which means the masked one. And he's tortured immediately by the host, set between numerous fires for 8 days, as one does.
That's not a nice way to treat him. I mean, he could have been carrying a horse cock if he was the man.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the trope, of course, that the Völsunga uses for King Olaf. And what then happens is that's the king's son, the prince. He comes and gives Odin something to drink. When he sat there for 8 nights, I see that as this happening on the 9th night. And as some of you may know, the number 9, the 9th night in Old Norse mythology is special. That's where things get cooking. That's the liminal number, basically, and means that these transformations can now take place because everything is structure is disintegrating. It's in a state of anti-structure.
It's also, he gives him mead, right? Like
he gives him a horn of mead to drink. Yeah. We could call that a libation ritual. Mm-hmm. And this libation then unlocks this numinous knowledge, this secret Odinic mythological knowledge that most of the poem then comprises of. So 40 stanzas straight of where the gods live and how the earth was created and how Yggdrasil, the world tree, is faring worse and worse because Ragnarok basically is approaching. And then there's a change in content in the poem where Odin then starts to recite, or well, Grimnir, we don't know that he's Odin yet, people. The performer starts reciting Odinic names. These lists of names for Odin, and the whole thing, the climax comes when he reveals his identity. He says that I was called this and that in the past, but now I'm called Odin. Come near if you dare. He says that to the king who's been torturing him.
Doesn't he also say that he's drunk? Doesn't he say, you're drunk?
Yeah,
and all the gods think you're a dumbass.
you drank too much, and when you do that, you lose my support and that of my Einherjar, or that of the Einherjar. And I see my friend's sword lying bloody before, kind of an ominous sign, and Gerda then dies, basically.
I feel like that would make the perfect "and at this moment he knew he fucked up" meme. When he reveals his Odin, he was just kind of like, oh shit.
Well, there's some good illustrations of Gerda, the king, just stumbling from his throne, having dropped his sword, and then it just hits him in the gut. Just
I think an important component to this is also that, I mean, Gerda violates a very important ethos here. You have to treat your guests well, right? The first thing he does is to chain Odin up and then put him between fires, and that's not a nice way to treat your guests.
That's no way to treat your guest. But that's to me that also signals that this is a liminal situation, right? Because one of the most important social codes of hospitality and the sanctity of the hall is violated by the ruler himself, right? And that's kind of sets up the whole thing quite nicely. So this is the narrative as we have it in the poem, and seeing that as kind of a representation of ritual activity is what I then argue for. That the performer, whoever that was, performed the role of Odin and reveals his identity gradually. Basically, he drops hints every now and then to his identity by mentioning not his name but Hugin and Munin, for instance, and that his son is Thor and stuff like that. And this would also, I argue, have ritually transformed the performer gradually. And the climax of the transformation is then when Odin's identity is revealed and the performer reveals himself as also being Odin in that moment.
And if I remember correctly, Simon, have you looked into the language that is used? Because if I remember correctly, the word that he uses when he reveals himself is a word that essentially means switch or change or something like that.
Oh yeah, so, Yppersvipum. Which has also
even I could have guessed that one.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So it can mean anything from visions having fleeted before his eyes to him lifting his face, which is my favorite, in line with again Terry Gunnell's reading of part of this poem, that Odin between the fires. The first thing he says is that these fires are pretty hot. Fire, get away! My cloak, the edge of my cloak is burning. And then he stands up, spreading, and I spread it out before me. He says. So we have this image of of a person with a burning cloak, standing with this cloak singeing at the edges, having lifted it up. And the argument is that for him to say that now I lift my face 45 stanzas later must mean that he's been looking down all this time, and he reveals his face at this point. And then we have the very interesting name that gives for themselves, the masked one. If we take that as kind of a describing name, we could argue that he saw someone mention a mask in the chat, and that's very right. That's there's potential use of a ritual mask in this poem, and the obvious link that's been made by among other Paul Mortimer and Neil Price is to the Sutton Hoo helmet, which is constructed in a way so the garnets that are set above as the eyebrow of the Sutton Hoo helmet, one side is set on gold foil, very thin gold material, and the other isn't, deliberately by the smith who made the helmet, meaning that when you enter a hall, and this has been done, reconstructions have been made, and this has been done experimentally by the living history group called Wulfaz. And when you enter a hall, it's only lit by fire. Gold foil catches the light from the fire, lighting up one eye, and the other eye remains dark, giving this again connection to Odin, basically. Not saying, of course, that that's the Sutton Hoo helmet was used to perform Grimnismal. That would be preposterous, but the motif, what's going on there could be similar, at least. And it's not only the Sutton Hoo helmet that has this distinct feature, it's just the one that has it to the highest degree.
Could the masks have any link to kind of the artworks we see in the masks we see in artwork? Obviously, we had Luciano on last episode, and we spent a bit of time looking at the cabin casket with the god masks kind of on there, and he was talking about the how they've been placed there with great care and symbolism, I guess, and they're not really understanding why these masks appear. And I just wonder whether there could be any link with those and these kind of ritual.
They could, and they, of course, we have to be careful with the generalizations we make, because there's a system of pre-Christian culture in the north, but a mask doesn't necessarily mean Odin. And
this is what Luciano was pointing out is quite interesting. We start seeing masks a lot in the very late pagan period, the early Christian period, which is interesting in and of itself. Are we dealing with a syncretic situation? Are we dealing with
possibly,
or maybe an attempt to signify pagan relations more than non-pagan? And he was also telling us how Christianity has a strained relationship to the idea of masks. Like they don't like them when you wear them, but if you put a mask on something, it's like, oh, okay, whatever. So there's there's something going on there. I've never personally looked into medieval Christian attitudes to masks, so I find it incredibly fascinating that
definitely
becomes such a thing in Scandinavia, and why and how and all that stuff. So
because he was saying about the Bamberg casket, how it had the one big mask on the lid, and it's how that must have had some significance, and it did seem to be kind of pointing a different way to all the other ones. It just got me thinking whether there could be any significance to these rituals, and obviously that kind of mask idea.
And the only scholar who I can't remember his name, who was researched the mythological imagery on the Bamberg cask, has suggested that it's an angel, which Luciano was like, that sounds like a stretch, and I agree with him on that one. But it's just interesting to consider that those who have actually looked into it are like, well, this is some kind of supernatural figure, right? So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So the performer turning into Odin, of course, has consequences for himself. That it gives him religious authority. It elevates his position and establishes him as someone who is in connection with the gods, a ritual specialist, so to speak. But it also potentially has consequences for those who attend the ritual, who are in the audience of the performance. And again, looking at the potential context of the elite hall in the Viking Age, some of the persons or some of the people that we assume were present at these, and we are told in the sources that we have about it, the rulers, comitatus, right? The warriors, the elite warriors, the bodyguard of the ruler, basically.
The thing we don't call them Männerbund any longer.
No, that would also, we don't know German, so that would be non-inclusive.
Right.
So these warriors, one of the underpinnings of why they do what they do is an ideology based on going to Valhalla when they die. And I see Valhalla as a idealized social image of the hall, basically. So we have Odin as the ruler, we have the Einherjar as the fighting, the elite warriors, the war band. We have Valkyrie, or the Valkyries, as representatives of the females who were no doubt also present in the Viking Age halls. And kind of working with this ideology, projecting it from the sources back into Viking Age reality, as it were. I looked at the content of the poem and noticed that some of the stanzas explicitly, of course, mention Einherjar, but also mention activities that are relatable to people in this environment. So eating and drinking, of course, fighting, which are basically the three things that happen in Valhalla. And it also mentions, so it mentions the Einherjar, but it also mentions, Grimnismal, for instance, mentions names for the Valkyria. And all these names etymologically are linked with active battle, most of them, or battle magic. We have descriptions of the Valkyria from for instance, Daradaljov, the poem of Durudr, an Irish king, of a battle, describing a battle of Clontarf, I think, maybe.
Yeah,
correct
or
me if I'm
Malden.
wrong,
I
someone.
can't remember which one.
Yeah.
One of them.
But basically it describes the Valkyrie as protecting, being present actively on the battlefield and protecting the king. And these Valkyria, other than having having links with active battle, they also, of course, have links with serving drink. And then we can build on the old argument. Well, yeah, it's old now. I think we could say mid-90s is old. From Michael Enright, wrote the book Lady with the Meat Cup. Basically argued that these high-ranking females presenting drink in a ritualized fashion to war bands was a role that was there in not only the Viking Age North and the Germanic area, but also the Celtic area. So kind of seeing these presumed, again, groups of people in the presumed audience as ritual participants, they had the potential to look for things to identify with. And those things would then, if we look at them as ritual utterances, had the potential to transform them into the mythological collectives in the ritual. And at the very least, give them an idea of what was going to happen in their afterlife, right?
One question about the Valkyrie and specifically Valkyries presenting drinks. Isn't that a Snorri thing? Isn't that particularly Snorri? Do we have
Grimnismal presents this as well. Well, he doesn't. That's the thing. He doesn't mention Valkyries. He doesn't mention the word Valkyries. What he does is he lists names that are other places used for Valkyries. For instance, in Eric's Haukonamal.
Yeah, no,
it takes some construction.
Right. No. Well, the idea of a female figure bringing drinks to the warriors, I think, is very legitimate. This is more like a nerd question about, like, is it exactly Valkyries or is it something else?
If we trust the names and the coincidence, well, if we don't think it's coincidental that the Valkyries performing what Valkyries do in Haukonamal and Eriksmal. In Haukonamal, no names are mentioned in Eriksmal, but in Haukonamal as well, and then the names in the list in Grimnismal. If we think there's a connection between those three things, then I think it's pretty safe to say that Valkyries had the potential to bear drink. Also, now I think about it, Eriksmal does say that Valkyries, so that the Einherja have to clean up the place because the king is coming, and the Valkyries have to bear wine. Vinbär.
That's right. That's
Vinbär.
right.
That's the they have to carry wine to King Erik. So yes.
Yeah, we have that whole clean up this mess and make it nice for the king and all.
Exactly. And I think
that sounds very Disney.
It is very Disney.
Like, all the animals from the forest come in and help out as well.
Yeah, I like to envision a scene because it starts with Odin saying, "What is this dream that I dreamt, where I told the Einherja to wake up, to rinse drinking cups, and the Valkyria to bear wine because a prince is coming to the hall tonight." That's the first stanza of this poem, and I like to envision this grumpy Odin kicking Einherja over the shins to wake up and clean up
get
the
your
house.
Asses up and do the dishes.
Do the dishes. And I think that also so I think that not disintegrates but kind of loosens the boundaries that older scholarship saw between the female domestic sphere in Valhall, and that's where the Valkyria basically belong because they are glorified barmaids, and the warrior men who fought, drank, and fucked and did it all.
The dishes apparently also.
But they also did the dishes, right? They also did the dishes. And again, the Valkyria also potentially fought.
Yeah. I just want to throw in support for what you're saying from Grimnismal. Stanza 36 does mention that they carry a beer for the Einherja. So it's not just Snorri who comes up with that.
He has it somewhere. From somewhere.
Snorri definitely has it, but it's a very consistent theme. It looks like. But they're not specifically mentioned as Valkyries. No. But the names are names of Valkyries that we know from other sources. So checks out.
Yeah.
Yes.
So potentially, so now we have the performer transforming into Odin. We have the participants transforming into mythological collectives. And then the third thing, which before I had a nice kind of 1, 2, 3 thing before we started recording, but there are 3 things. There always are 3 things. And there are 3 things, 3 transformations taking place. For you who are listening later, I'm holding 3 fingers up to the camera. We had, now I'm holding 2 of them. We had the 2. And the third one is...
By the way, you added the third finger there as well.
Yes. We're doing our best. The third thing is the performance space. So there's been a lot of discussion about, did the Vikings have temples or did they not? famously the grumpy. Well, I didn't know him, so I can't really say. But his writing is always strikes me as some form of grumpiness. Olaf Olsen, the archaeologist from Aarhus.
Yes.
He was very
I'm
critical.
pretty sure he was grumpy.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say. So he famously wrote a book where he vehemently denied that the Viking, the people in the Viking Age had ritual buildings. Basically, they only performed rituals out of doors.
Didn't Ellen Lund also get on that wagon for a while and was very
he possibly did that, but and this all kind of hinges on the lack at the time of archaeological material, because Olaf Olsen was an archaeologist. Since then,
and he was looking for stuff that sort of like was more along the lines of what happens in Greece or Rome, like
yes,
he's like, I can't find any pillars anywhere, so there's no
where
temple.
are the marble pillars, for crying out loud. But since then, places like Ubokra in Skåne in Sweden, Tisø, Sjælland, Denmark, the newly discovered temple structure in Norway, I forget where, but there are structural similarities, architectonic similarities, and of course deposits that pretty certainly tells us that these were used for ritual activity.
And of course Uppsala as well, right?
Uppsala as well. We have earlier now we have Festel in southern Jylland, dating to the Iron Age, which also has weird deposits, and so there are buildings that fulfill the role basically of ritual buildings. Some of them are set aside, like in Tisø and in Ubokra, we have separate buildings, separate to the hall. But the hall still, to my mind at least, has a potential as a ritual arena, not the form of ritual that we would readily identify as ritual, namely kind of killing animals and stuff like that, or making offerings to idols and stuff like that. But these forms of poetic performances taking place in the hall would classify, I think, as rituals.
That's actually what I was going to ask, is that these performances of the poems seem quite obviously like theatre, and would they be viewed as entertainment, or would you also be hoping to kind of get something back? Which I guess is how I always think of a ritual, is that you do an action in hoping to get something back from the gods. I mean, is that kind of how the same thing with the performance from the poems, or is it just an entertainment for the
well, crowd? You play right into my hand then, because I take strong issue with the differentiating between entertainment and ritual. That's very Protestant of you, because
yes.
because in Protestant Christianity, which many, at least in the Northern European context, that's their view of how religion is. It's fucking boring. Sorry for offending anyone, but Protestant ritual is boring. Yeah. And if you expect to find that, then you don't find ritual. But you, in the Viking Age and in so many other cultures, ritual is a spectacle. Ritual is entertaining. And there, I don't think that there necessarily has to be kind of a watertight barrier between the two. I like to see it sort of as a spectrum, right? We have very intense, very clearly ritual. Again, I'm using my hand, sorry for the podcast listeners. At the one end of the spectrum, we have very, very markedly ritual. On the other end, we have less markedly ritual, but still retaining some ritual features. I think in these performances would have had both sides. They would have to some would have been more religiously loaded than to others. and to the people drunkenly fighting way down the table, couldn't hear a thing. You know, they were there, of course. One of the main points of ritual studies, just to make an aside, is basically that it doesn't matter if you believe or if you actively feel that you take part in a ritual. If you're there, you're part of the ritual, and you don't have to understand anything. I said that a lot of times during my PhD defense to my family. It doesn't matter if you don't understand what I'm saying, Mom. You know, you're here for the spectacle, and I appreciate that. Same goes for all you guys. But taking part has degrees as well, right? Not all would take part on equal terms or in equal degrees. But coming back to the space, in performing something in a space that was used for everyday activities, the performance, I argue again, transforms the place, and it does so in a number of ways. It does so by conflating that which is being performed in poetry with this place that we are in now. So performance, the poems often use words like here or in to denote that the poems that often take place in halls or around halls take place in this context that we are in now, right? And this place sometimes in Grimnismal is just whatever otherworldly hall or whatever ruler's hall that's then transformed by Odin coming into the hall. But in Eiríksmal, for instance, in Grimnismal and in Havamál, it's Odin's hall, it's Valhall. So we have this conflation of what I call the performance space, the everyday hall, and the performed space of the poems, of the content of the poems, and conflating the two is one way to ritually transform the hall space. Another way is building on, and Grimnismal does this brilliantly, building on the mythological landscape as we know it. So we know that around Odin's hall there is a well, and the world tree is there. And we know that in the mythological kind of, in the cosmology, as we call it, the way the world is constructed, we know that there is primeval fires. And we know, admittedly only from Snorri, that the sky is held up by 4 dwarfs. And this is then coming back to an argument of Terry Gunnell's in medieval Icelandic manuals for building houses. The kind of the little wooden pieces that keep up the roof of halls are called dvergar. They're called dwarfs.
It's the same in Denmark and Norway.
Yeah.
They are still called dwarfs.
Yeah. So that kind of all that playing on that imagery, basically saying in Grimnismal that on top of the hall, which is here, which is also Valhall, which is Odin's hall, there's a goat eating off the world tree, and the fire that we have at the beginning and also throughout resembles the fires of Muspel. We have these elements that then would create a sort of microcosm in the hall. So the high seat pillars could be argued to represent the tree. The kettle on the fireplace could be argued to represent the body of water near Yggdrasil, and the hall roof being held up by dwarves also has its own kind of connotations, right? So building on this, in the performance, when these places and these elements are mentioned, some of the bearers of pre-Christian culture would have made the identification. That's the argument, basically. And then the space would have been transformed into a ritual space, underpinned by this mythological reality. Yeah.
That is fascinating. So do you think I know you said it has effects on people. Do you think they would have had like a direct effect in a sense of, like you said in the first point, that the leader of the hall was killed because he disrespected Odin? Could he go as far as that, do you think, in the ritual, that somebody ends up dead?
So my view on that, Dan, is that the poem is a representation of an inauguration ritual, of an initiation ritual, in which that the king who dies is the old ruler who, in the ritual reality, has been killed already or is dead already, and he's just there to be shipped off into the other place, into the other world, to be collected by Odin. And the prince who pours the libation for Odin is the one who is initiated as the new king. The ritual specialist acting as Odin is then the one who performs the ritual.
I think we have other sources that can indicate a like deliberate sacrifice of a king.
That as well, yeah.
Ynglinga Saga, or Ynglinga Tal in Ynglinga Saga as an example, and we also have what is it? That story from Saxo. There's a Saxo story as well. There's always a Saxo story, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So yeah, we do have those situations too, but I don't know if we could in any possible way link this poem up to that. Like,
well, we can do anything we want. The
I guess so.
People will believe us, right?
That's true. Yes. Good point.
So ruler sacrifice definitely seems to have been something that the ruler had to factor into what he was doing.
Yes, that's what I usually call the Viking version of the French Revolution. So.
Yes. I mean, I can't help but draw some comparisons to what Ed Gamester's trying to do with his show and this kind of ritual idea of telling the stories. Because I know, especially speaking to him, he spoke about how he wanted to bring in the audience and how the space was important, and he was telling the stories through theatre. So Simon, it's Ed Gamester he's been on the show a few times, and he put together a live show which incorporates pro wrestling into telling the myths of. So he started with Ragnarok, and I went to see it, and it was all, to be honest, it was quite a ritualistic feeling kind of scenario. It was the stage was in the middle, and everyone sat all the way around, and he went through the story of Ragnarok with performing. It was theatre. It was a full performance piece, and as you spoke, I couldn't help but think of that being kind of how that might have been.
I think one of the things that we tend to forget as modern humans, possibly because of the context of athletics nowadays, is that athletics back in ancient Greece, right, and also the spectacles in Rome and in the Colosseum, they all had religious components to them.
There are incredibly many parallels between sports performances and sport events, be it whatever form of football you're into, or hockey, or anything. The way that that supporters of a team treat their team, the team being represented by often a totem animal of sorts, right, the mascot, and the liminal state that you're in whatever arena that the thing takes place in. There are a lot of parallels. So on
a phenomenological level.
On a phenomenological way, definitely.
But I would also keep in mind that when Greece converted to Christianity, that's when the games stopped. That's when they stopped having the Olympic Games, right? Or at least when Christianity became the dominant religion. So there's something to be said for athletics and such things in the incipiency in those Mediterranean societies, having had distinct religious contexts of various kinds.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so this is why in modern times everything is about genre in modern times, right? We separate different kinds of books into genres. We separate TV shows, music, and all that stuff, right? But in context of earlier pre-Christian societies in particular, we should see a lot of these things that we tend to want to separate into different genres as associated with one another, and sometimes quite often the same even. So so that that is definitely part of that worldview that they had, right?
Like I say, I wanted to just bring that up because it was being there live. It was certainly it was an amazing spectacle, and you couldn't help but be sucked into the performance. You kind of overcome with emotion. I'm sure it wasn't everybody there felt the same. And like I say, as you were speaking about them performing these poems, it kind of made ties for me in that. And I wondered how many people are kind of doing this thing today.
I mean, I'm all for basing a new modern religion off of Ed Gamster's wrestling performances. So if we could get that ball rolling, I'm down.
I mean, even if you took because obviously the wrestling was only a small part of it. It was just that the fight scenes had the wrestling because he wanted to. I needed a way to portray the fighting or the battles with a very few people. But it was as much theater as it was anything else, and the telling of the story. So yeah, I'd like to say, it did feel almost ritualistic in the moment when you're there. So
definitely,
it drew those comparisons.
Anyone who loves going to concerts can probably tell you the same story. That also, especially if you are really into a scene and you go to a show with other people who are really into a scene or a band, you can get this feeling of belonging together. What we with the Durkheimian word called a collective effervescence. That this elevated feeling of unity in a group, and that's what I argue. Basically, coming back to me, I argue that that's what these rituals potentially had the potential. That's horrible to do, right? That the group would feel more united with each other and with their leader and with their God. And an upside of that is that furthering this in-group pro-sociality and in-group identification is a good thing in a warrior society, so that you don't just run away when shit gets hot. You stay and you fight for your group, you fight for your leader, you fight for your God, you fight for for the promise of an afterlife that's worth
for some Valkyrie Nookie, eh?
Also potentially that. Also Einherja Nookie if you're into that.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
But you do. Yeah, I mean, you
after doing the dishes.
You're completely correct in that. You do have to bring a sense of camaraderie. I guess, like I say, I can only put things into perspective of my life. And when I played rugby,
I did too.
We were family and brothers on the field. And in that moment, I was willing to die to win, and then to get this little ball over that little white line and get those vital points. But that's how it was, because you get whipped up into this emotion. And in that moment, it's a battle, and you're willing to risk serious harm for what is nothing really. It's just some little points on a board. But
it's so much fun also running into other grown men at great speed. I love it.
Yeah.
If
but
only
this
my
is also
body
why
could do it.
This is why you have young men doing it. They're easier to rile up like that. Older men are more like, got a kid at home, and also
us old boys maybe have one game a year in us. Also because that you throw out your shoulder or your knee, and then you're fucked for the rest of the season.
So, exactly.
You
get a hernia.
Oh, that sounds horrible.
It does. Okay, so one question I guess I get asked quite a lot, and this is off rituals, but more just onto like pre-Christian, is what sources can we trust? What,
None of them.
That I know that's the answer.
But it isn't. Yeah, there isn't the whole answer.
But like, what can people who want to read and get an accurate idea of what the religion would have been in kind of like pre-Christian Viking Age? Where do they look? Because it seems to some people, I guess, that no matter what they read, there's somebody saying, "Well, that's bullshit. Don't trust that. This is why that's inaccurate."
Yeah. And I think there's if we take accuracy as our measuring stick, we don't get far. But it also, it depends on what you want from the sources, right? It's a fantastic little piece by a Danish scholar called Preben Molnrak Sørensen, who in 91 wrote an article or chapter in a book about the differentiation between what you want in Eddic poetry, for instance, in Old Norse sources. So that if you want to look at the physical manuscripts and at the text as linguistic product, by all means, go nuts, and that's legitimate. You get an accurate picture of the medieval Christian context in Iceland in which these manuscripts were produced. But if you want to look at the content, and if you want to see whether or not that fits with what we think we know about a Viking Age tradition, then you can do that as well. You just need to bear in mind that the other context is there as well. So you can't take everything at face value. You have to be critical. So, back to the horse penis, right? You have to be critical about what you
always
read.
Back to the horse penis.
I feel like this is going to be a theme for the rest.
Oh, it is. For the rest of the podcast, not just the show.
Sorry about that.
There's nothing to apologize.
Well, not as much as when I presented a paper to the Danish Icelandic Horse Association's 50th anniversary and took out this myth. The 50-something ladies in Icelandic sweaters, no offense meant to anyone, but they turned very pale. Yeah. So where were we? We were talking about.
So y'all are into horses.
Accuracy.
Let me talk about it.
Don't believe everything you hear about the horse penis, because there is some grain of truth, maybe many grains of truth in that story, and there definitely are many accurate representations of mythological concepts in Eddic poetry, but there are also some that we should be wary about. And if you want accurate Viking Age sources, you go to the archaeology. The only problem with the archaeological material is that it can't speak, can't tell you anything. You have to interpret it. You have to use your modern methods, your modern mind, and the medieval sources again to decode what's happening there. You have to use comparative material when you don't know what the fuck is going on. And so yes, those sources are accurate, and as accurate as they get. But if you only use those sources, you don't get anywhere.
Mm-hmm. That's the problem. I feel like I've been telling you this, Dan, already.
I know the answer. I'm putting it out there for everybody else.
I know. I'm just teasing you.
That's my role here.
But I mean, it's a really complicated situation with the source material, because going back to a guy like Adam of Bremen, right? We have what is presumed to be his original text, and then we have like also these inserts in the text that are younger, and those are actually they're actually more fun. They're the ones that actually talk about the temple and all that stuff, right? And so it's like there's like several layers in one single text where at some point you have to like look at it and be like, well, this portion over here seems to be closer to the Viking Age than this portion over there, and it's like,
and then we haven't even touched on Skaldic poetry,
right?
Because Skaldic poetry is funny in that it's presumed to be some, as Old Norse sources, Old Norse language sources come, some of the most trustworthy and accurate of the bunch. The only problem is that they're really fucking hard to understand, right?
Well, I mean, a lot of them have also just like, I think a lot of them have also just been like attributed to somebody in a saga. It's like, oh, so then Egil Skallagrimsson composed this poem, and then there's a little ditty, and it's like, we don't know if he did that. That's what some 13th century author of this story is saying. It's like, so,
but I think the gist of the whole argument surrounding Skaldic poetry is that the meter in Skaldic poetry, or one of the meters used in Skaldic poetry, is incredibly complex and complicated. And if you change one word, the whole thing, falls apart. So that means that we have, well, the transmission of Skaldic poetry in the manuscripts is thought to be quite accurate because it's so strict. The Eddic poetry isn't as strict, and there's more room to wiggle, but still there are rules that have to be kept. And then when in an oral society that's newly converted to using writing, we know this from for instance South Africa. We know this from the Anglo-Saxon material. People could do both. They could perform something from their mind orally, but they could also use that knowledge to write shit down, right? And we have examples of that being done, and that's a distinct possibility with Eddic poetry as well, right? That's people who kept the tradition alive or who composed new poetry according to the tradition also wrote this poetry down.
Yeah,
because they could, right? They had the technology.
Yeah. I mean, the whole discussion of like what is historically accurate and how are things remembered and all that stuff is incredibly fascinating too, because if we go to modern situations of court trials and research into witness testimonies, for instance, all of a sudden we realize that, wait a minute, the way that people could reconstruct the past through their memory is entirely their own. Like the whole
definitely.
That old idea of like, we will get to a point where we can like positively verify that this happened and it happened in this way and all that stuff, completely out of the window at that point.
Yeah, definitely. Like, there's also a lot of there's ritual anthropology of ritual, cognitive anthropology of ritual that's looked at specific firewalking rituals in Mauritius, and people can't remember shit from going through these rituals. They don't remember anything because they're so high on adrenaline and just trying to kind of get through it all. What they do rely on is the conversations that they had with each other afterwards. They construct a common kind of scene, and what they're told this means and is supposed to mean by religious authority before. Their own experience doesn't really matter. And that kind of that's I think is also very interesting in terms of looking at prehistoric and pre-Christian ritual. That doesn't really matter what you think you experience, because what you are going to remember, how you reconstruct your experience, is based on your cultural knowledge and the group that you experienced it with.
That's definitely fascinating, because I know a few people who see things one way when the reality is something completely the opposite. Yeah, we all know a few
common
people
human
like
traits.
I think we do, yes.
How much do you look at rituals in other cultures that I guess that still exist today? Do you ever look at those to then try and look back in times and link it to a pre-Christian religion?
Yeah, maybe not, completely modern, but at least kind of 1900s and upwards, and that's of course also problematic.
I guess things are better documented than what we have.
And what's interesting in something like that is that that's the in a place like Nigeria, in Yoruba land, in Western Africa, where we talked about candomblé earlier, that has roots in Western Africa. But in Western Africa, sorry, the old religion, the old Yoruba religion, still is alive today. So we can kind of check the old missionaries' descriptions against what still is being performed and being believed in today. And there's a whole, it is, so to say, complicated. I know you like that. It is complicated,
but what we would also expect from any tradition is that it evolves over 100 years. What I find fascinating about the Yoruba traditions is that there's so like both rituals and mythologies and ideas about the world and all ideology that attaches to that, so fucking similar to what it looks like in Viking Age Scandinavia.
It's fantastic. And a place like Hawaii pre-conversion, another place that's just, I've done some research on that, and it's just baffling. There are, of course, culturally specific differences. There needs to be, and there is, of course, and those are equally important. But there's so many structural similarities. Ruler sacrifice, for instance, both in Yoruba religion in pre-Christian North, and especially in pre-conversion Hawaii, was such an important part of the society, basically. And
so, what would be the purpose of sacrificing a ruler?
I told you this already. It's the Viking version of the French Revolution. It's when the ruler doesn't work anymore.
That's what I was wondering. I was wondering if would it be a case if they decide it's a successful ruler, so they sacrifice a successful ruler in hope that you get good things back.
You can do both, right? You can either if things go badly, you can sacrifice the one in charge. But basically, when in Denmark, a lot of banks have a problem with laundering money, and what they do is then they take the director of whatever branch and they fire. You can do that, and then hopefully things will get better. In these pre-Christian societies, pre-Christian societies have a kind of another logic to them in that they sacrifice the king because he's the most potent sacrificial victim, right? And in pre-Christian Hawaii, it also is a way to consolidate power, right? So if in pre-conversion Hawaii, rulers were perpetually trying to one-up each other. Everyone wanted more. Everyone wanted to be the paramount ruler, basically. And when someone succeeded in winning, if they hadn't killed the paramount ruler in the process, they would sacrifice him ritually to the war god Ku. And they did that because he was the most potent victim.
And in a more real sense, because he is a threat to their rulership right?
Yeah, definitely. But it went as far in pre-Christian Hawaii, actually, that every human sacrifice represented the king. If you violated the taboo, you were sacrificed as a stand-in for the king.
But how much of that is a sacrifice, and how much is that just doing the logical thing of killing off your nearest competition or killing off the king who's shit?
But that's the thing. It's all pragmatic.
It's mixed, right? It's giving a religious and mythological reason and meaning to something that needs to be done anyway. We see this with a lot of rituals.
See, that's the thing. Our tendency, this is why I like to compare this situation to the French Revolution. Our tendency to analyze, right, is that we pick it apart. We pick the French Revolution apart as a political process, but it's just as much a sacrificial process. You could give it a religious wrapping, and then you'll see a people that is experiencing famine and hunger and decide to sacrifice their ruler to make the situation better, right?
Mhm.
That is no different, really, in terms of the logics you could apply to that, as if you see some, 9th century Viking population doing the same thing. They just have, a different scaffolding holding all of these ideas up of like why they did it and why it needs to happen and so on. You could apply the same logics to those successive sacrifices of emperors that kept happening in late antiquity in Rome, right? That how different is that from the Hawaiian example of like, now I've won up this ruler over here, he needs to get out of the way. Again, we look at the Roman example and we're like, well, that's a political process. This is getting rid of competition. But we look at the Hawaiian example as something that has to do with, religion and mythology and so on. Both things go together here. So
yeah. I think it was in the Terry Gunnar episode that he said how we need to, or forget or not think of ritual as getting something back, which is kind of how I probably thought of ritual in the past, and probably a lot of people listening to this still do. In the idea of you will sacrifice a goat in hope that you're going to get a good harvest. That's kind of how ritual has always been portrayed, and a lot of people will think of it. Whereas it seems in these senses that maybe it's something that has to be done. So it's a ritual thing, and you're not necessarily expecting to get something back from it. It's just
probably
action.
It really depends, right, on if a lot of different factors. Like there are some rituals that are definitely that exist to get stuff back, but there are also rituals that exist to correct a cosmic situation, right? Or another way have a cosmic implications that can go in many different directions. Wouldn't you agree, Simon?
But would that
definitely
would that not still be getting something back if you're wanting a cosmic change? It might not be like in a physical thing of like crop, but it would still be something.
Or it's just something that needs to happen because if you have a rationalization that is cosmic, that could be an explanation for it. If you needed an explanation, sometimes you may.
The rituals where you get something back, they definitely also existed, and they are, you kind of conceptualize rituals almost in 3 ways. You perform a ritual to change your status, basically. You can change it to the better. You can kind of, there's not much change in status quo, but you can also perform a ritual to keep the status quo. But you can also perform a ritual to go from something that's worse to something that is status quo, or that's better than the worst. So this, if you have a plus, you have a 0, and you have a minus, you can change your status from any of these 3 by performing a ritual. And performing a ritual to keep status quo, which is one of the main logics underpinning many oral societies. And basically, if you don't perform the rituals, the world will end. Right?
Okay.
And that's the logic. Right? If you don't perform the rituals, we won't be here tomorrow, or we won't be here in a year. And that's also why a story like Ragnarok is so effective, right? And that, if you don't perform the rituals, basically, the sun will be eaten by a giant fucking wolf. And the world will sink into the sea, and you will die. And then, of course, the earth will come back, and everything will be fine and dandy for those who survived. But you will die, right? Your family will die. Everyone will die except these.
But I mean, we also go to places of like, well, we perform rituals that have hitherto been rationalized as they will maintain the world order, but since they have now stopped and we're then trying to reinstate them, like that, I'm using the example of Rome here, it's because of tradition, right? It's because we need to bring back good virtues or something like that. There are plenty of examples of Roman rituals where we see different rulers, if it's consuls or imperators, or later on emperors and so on, violating certain religious processes, right? And then we have scholars like Cicero and Lucan and others like Cato talking about this and being like, okay, so back in the day, this and that particular consul didn't consult the auguries before he did something, and that was very bad, and we need to bring that back because tradition. Right. So that's also, but I mean, tradition is in a sense also an appeal to bringing back a world order, right? Like when you say because tradition, then you're also saying, well, because of a distinct idea I have of a world order that is either in decline or no longer exists or should be brought back or whatever, right? Then that the rituals become significant in context of like reestablishing an order of the world. So in that sense, I guess also, the idea that if we stop doing this, the world will end. That also applies to this less cataclysmic level of the world ending, right?
Yeah.
Maintaining an order.
Yeah.
The world as we know it, right? Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of interesting, actually.
It feels like hopefully a lot of this conversation might help people question what they define as a ritual. Because it may not be what you think. I know obviously we've done a lot of these episodes now, and we've spoken to a lot of interesting people, and my opinion has certainly changed from what I originally thought to what I think now, but I still try to put myself in the position of how I used to think, to try and, I guess, ask the questions of what I would, and I assume that a lot of people listening to this will have that idea of a ritual being very much a give-receive transaction. So it's really interesting to hear that maybe it's not that simple. It is a case of that maybe it's to prevent something, or just because something needs to be done. But it's done in a kind of a ritualistic, or thought of as a ritualistic.
I mean, in many ways, you could say ritual is almost always about, or maybe always, I don't know. Simon, just tell me to shut up if
I'm very excited to hear what you say next.
About maintaining order, like whether or not it's a ritual that seeks to get something, like for instance, more pigs in my pen, or whatever the ritual is, even if it's a destructive one, a ritual that seeks to kill your enemies or whatever, right? The purpose of the person making the ritual might be said to always, in some way or other, aim at maintaining an order that you want to impose on the world.
Maintaining or also changing. Rituals are often about change, for better or for worse, right? I'm sorry to leave this to the kind of almost 2-hour mark. Well, no, 1.5 maybe. I've bad numbers, but basically, we can define ritual as a certain type of activity that is performed by an individual or group on behalf of this individual or on behalf of the group that seeks to change something, and that has as a consequence for the group a furthered sense of belonging together, of unity, right? And that's kind of that's my amalgam of ritual scholars and scholars of religion that I've read. That's what I see, at least in the Viking Age context, right?
I would say that unity is the order aspect of things, right? Because
definitely.
That maintains an idea of order. I mean, one speaking of Rappaport that you mentioned earlier, I mean,
yes.
this is his observations in pigs for the ancestors. I think is really interesting. That's a ritual cycle that I've worked with myself in context of volcanoes, right? Because it's actually, if you ask me, that this whole situation is derived from volcanic activity. We have a situation where this particular tribe in Papua New Guinea that lives in the vicinity of a volcano, or actually a couple volcanoes, whenever certain type of marsupials that live in the forest areas around them become too populous, they start going to war. So they're killing off the marsupials, they start smoking, and they do war rituals, and then they attack their neighbors. And it's because of the population of the marsupials. But the overall reasoning behind all of this seems actually to be connected to the smoke woman who lives up in Mount Oipo. And we want to make sure that she doesn't come out. So it's actually a very destructive war ritual that has the potential of, even destroying the tribe itself. If their neighbors are too powerful, for instance.
Could that be
that goes into this cycle of destruction, but is intended to maintain actually equilibrium between our existence and volcanic eruptions and these freaking marsupials that they for some reason connect to them?
Could that be based on some kind of environmental change leads to the marsupials populating more, and then it's almost like you're sending nature as the marsupials grow. That's kind of a trigger warning that the volcanic eruption may happen.
Yeah, so there's, I think the logic behind it is that when the marsupials they reach a certain population number, this is when we last time recorded in oral history a volcanic eruption that was devastating to some extent. So their cosmos, right, is based off of the valley they live in, and there's fire at the top and there's water below. So there's also something that has to do with mitigating the relationship between fire and water in their environment through these rituals, right? So yeah, it has something to do with that, and it's
probably just poor marsupials, really. It's just coincident.
It's totally coincidence, right?
And they just get
the thing is that this whole thing makes perfect sense when you understand the environmental conditions that the population of this tribe lives in, and the mythological universe that they live in as well. It's like, oh yeah, okay, of course you would,
context is everything, right?
Context is everything. And you could say that killing off the marsupials and also raiding your neighboring tribes has everything to do with population control, right? Because what is a common element in volcanic eruptions is that it's probably going to disrupt as at least parts of your food production systems and your ability to gather resources in one way or other, right? So it makes perfect sense that you then start bolstering your storage, right? By taking slaves, by killing off neighbors so that you have more land to hunt on and farm if you need to, right? And also, of course, building up supplies by killing these animals in your vicinity.
Before we wrap up, I just want to touch on the conversation of belief that we had before we hit recording, and that made me just think of Mathias talking about the marsupials and how we could link it to that, because as I said, like if you believe that when the marsupial population rises, that's kind of like a free choice thing. People might believe that, but if you genuinely, it's just an absolute that when the marsupials get to a certain level, that the volcano will erupt, and that is just an absolute fact. Then it makes sense that when you get to that point, you're like, okay, we need to now go to war, because that is just a thing. It's not a belief. It's what happens. And we were talking about that earlier before we forgot to hit record.
And I think my my disliking the word the belief in a pre-Christian context stems from the sort of connotations it has in Danish. I realized that after talking to actual native speakers, that belief doesn't necessarily entail always the investedness that it, to me at least, does in Protestant Christianity, which is kind of
I would say that
context.
in English you get some of the same connotations. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that you're totally off.
My problem is that belief has to do with kind of an inner individual world.
It feels like a choice almost from
and your personal religion depends on what you believe in. Do you believe that Odin has the potential to appear in this world? Do you believe in Christ the Almighty? Do you believe in whoever you believe in Buddha? Not Buddha's bad. Sorry.
I think even to put it into
I don't know, man.
Put into a modern context. You get people who believe against scientific facts, like the world being flat. You get people who believe that, even though it's not true, the world's round.
Yes.
So it is kind of like that choice.
The argument that I try to make with it in my research is that it's not necessary for people to believe or not believe that these things could take place, because the worldview, the cosmos that they lived in, was what we call monistic. It comprises of various different worlds that are connected. So traveling between these worlds, if you have the right vehicle or the right propensities, you can do that. It's a large part of the mythology, even that,
like a horse penis.
Exactly. Or eight of them strapped to no. So if you the potential of at least the gods entering this the world of humans, without a question. But and I would also argue that humans entering the world of the gods, at least when they die, right? Potentially also while they are living in some form, and that's just, it's a no-brainer. It's like dropping your pen and saying, well, okay, the gravity still works, good for us, right? And it's the same thing. You don't believe in gravity. It's a part of your world. It's a constant, and you don't believe in the gods because they are your friends, right? They're part of your world, and they influence your world, and they decide whether or not you have success. At least that's the generalized system we see.
Yeah, no, because you do get today's people who believe or not in Christianity, but it seems like back then it was more that's just life. They didn't consciously think that they believe in this pre-Christian religion. It was more just that's life. Is that? Am I? I felt like I was getting it until Mathias pulled that face.
Well, you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Kinda.
But we should, and this is where I will refer to both Simon and my teacher, right, Jens Peter Schødt, who's pointed out that that belief, or how committed you are to a belief system or a religion or whatever, also comes down to various factors that have to do with like psychology and social positions in life, and a lot of different factors, and go back again to pre-Christian Mediterranean literature, and you can find a lot of different attitudes to what the gods are, or if the gods exist, and all of that stuff. And I think over time, at least, although the populations in Northern Europe have been smaller than in the Mediterranean area, But over time, you'll probably find similar variations. They just haven't written much down about it. And I think that's the same across the planet, right? Like you find a lot of different attitudes.
But I think my point is that there are, of course, different attitudes, whether Odin was this or that, or whether he was your favorite god, or you preferred Freyr or Freya, or whoever you worship the most, or in most contexts. But the god's existence isn't questioned nearly as much. You know, there are, of course, people who would rather believe in this themselves, right?
I mean, we do find those attitudes in ancient Rome, right? In Greece, definitely, in Egypt, definitely. Right? It's like people who do say, "I don't think the gods exist," and I'm sure that you could find that too, perhaps not at the same rate, so to speak, right? But because we're dealing with smaller societies,
right?
I think that maybe is as kind of these civilizations get to a certain level of advancement, then people get the freedom to maybe step away and not believe in religion. I guess like we had to today. A lot of people believe in religion than maybe.
No, man. You've never been to the US then. Everybody believes in something here. Like,
but not in the UK. I would say it's the complete. I think
opposite.
Religion is people believing in religion is a rarity over here. So that's why I wondered if advancement gave people the freedom to then.
I think that has something to do with cultural modes. Like that's what we're dealing with. We're not dealing with advancement. We're not dealing with different religions for that matter. We're dealing with cultural modes that are more or less dominant in a society. I did the awful mistake of listening to the interview with the QAnon shaman. I don't know if you remember that guy with the horned headdress and the America face. I was just listening to that, and that is some crazy ass rambling. The problem with that crazy ass rambling is that I've heard it from a lot of people that I'm also relatively good friends with, because so much of it is just an amalgam of a lot of like standard cultural ideas and attitudes that are present in American society, and also to an extent in Europe. And again, cultural mode rather than whether or not we have advanced to a spot where we're more skeptical towards religion. There's plenty of people out there in very advanced societies that are not skeptical towards religion. Go to the Arabian Peninsula, you'll find a lot of examples of that too, right? So so it has something that we have to look for the reason for skepticism towards, like, whether or not gods or God exist in something else, if you ask me. And I think the main thing is actually culture more than anything. Like if it's culturally relevant for religion to exist.
And I think one of the points about the role of religion in the Viking Age is, and has been made numerous times by, for instance, Anders Hultgaard, from Uppsala, the old historian of religion. He's argued that and this makes total sense to me, at least, in a society like Viking Age society, late Iron Age society, whatever you call it, culture and religion is so intertwined. Religion is so much a part of culture, as is art and entertainment and all other things that and this is basic Max Weber, that over time, at least, culture gets separated into something that is religion and isn't. And that which isn't religion is then separated into what he calls value spheres of the economic, of sexuality, of intellectual, of art and stuff like that. And that just isn't the case in Viking Age. We still have a big ball, a big lump of things that we call culture. And we as modern people have to, and modern scholars have to, dig into that to find with that which we define as religion, and that we can recognize as religion. There's a whole in the history of religion, there's been a hot debate about whether or not religion existed in Rome, for instance, because they didn't have a word for religion. They didn't have they didn't call their religion something we can identify as religion, and that's just a mute point because they didn't need it, because their culture was so intertwined in what we would call religion that they just didn't need it, right? And that's just the case in so many cultures that people, in these cultures set porridge out for the farm spirits. They pour them a little glass of beer, so it doesn't sour, and they have to keep them happy, right? And that's a ritual to us. That's part of religion to us, but it's just part of everyday life, right?
Well, see, this is a really interesting discussion, right? Because seeing Frederick in the chat here saying that the only thing religious about Scandinavia is the flags, and that is true and not true at the same time, because in Scandinavian cultures, and whether you're in Denmark, Sweden, or Norway, Iceland for that matter, there's so much Lutheranism, right? It's like there's so much Christian culture entwined in society in and of itself. There are so many things that have to do with that, as well as being some of the most secular countries on the planet too, right? It's really fascinating as somebody. I can't say that I've had like a very strong relationship to the Danish Lutheran Church, but as somebody who from time to time find myself in Lutheran churches here in the US, I'm like, oh yeah, of course I know everything that's going on here, because that was just like culturally ingrained in me from birth, pretty much, right?
Yeah. But the thing is, about that lack of religion is that, yes, a lack of explicit religion, lack of explicit religiosity, is belief in God and performance of rituals at certain times. The Scandinavian countries are very secular. But I have a colleague.
In one sense, but then also in another sense.
No, the point is exactly that there is a whole nother thing going on, which in Danish is called kulturreligion, right? Cultural religion. And I have a fantastic colleague, a PhD student called Anne Lundahl Mauritsen, who researches this. She researches non-religion and cultural religion, because it has a lot of the same things that we call religion, even though it defines itself in opposition to exactly that. Right? I
mean, Denmark even has like an Ayatollah kind of person. Right? We have the Queen. She's like the head of the national religion. Right, and she's got like bishops that have like religious functions and also social functions, and we have the equivalent of the Ministry of Magic in the ecclesiastical ministry, right? That governs religion in society. Like all of this stuff is like if you look at it on a constitutional level, you'd be like, is that Iran? Or what are we dealing with here, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But of course it's not like it's
well, at least geographically. Many other ways.
But it's the same. It's rather similar in the UK, in many ways with these structures, right? There are these very religious structures in place in society that actually have real consequences for things that are happening in society, that also amount to public rituals of various kinds. In Denmark, for instance, watching the Queen's New Year's speech is sort of like a public religious ritual of some kind. I mean, I fucking do it from the US.
Yeah, she mentioned us. Yeah, well, not me personally, but she mentioned researchers, and she mentioned people from the part of Denmark where I'm from. So I was happy.
And
I felt seen.
Yes, she also mentioned Danes from the out there in the world.
She always does that. You're home safe, man. Don't take my thunder, dude.
I'm sorry. Yeah, no, it's right. She mentioned the southern Danes.
Yes, they go home, nemlig.
Right. Yeah. Should we wrap this up? We've been going, I think it's nearly an hour.
We didn't even. I'll have to come back to tell you about
you
black
are
metal,
back,
for instance.
You are back without a doubt.
Yes.
If Mathias ever doesn't feel well, you can pop on a cap, take the glasses off, and nobody will know the difference.
Oh shit! Are you looking for my replacement?
I think I've just found it. If you ever annoy me now, I've just found it.
I'm on the bench, right? I'm on the bench.
You're on the bench.
Well,
we definitely would like you to come back and talk about the stuff that you're doing with runestones and all that stuff too.
Yes, there's just no point trying to cram that into this. This episode held its own with rituals. I mean, you know, it was a fun one. I think, you're welcome back. You're welcome back anytime.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, you're just a really good speaker, so I get to sit here in silence and enjoy and just soak it all in, which is always nice and easy for me.
That's good.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much for joining us, Simon. This has been great to catch up on your scholarship and hearing your clever words.
Well, you too. Even though I always like our small disagreements.
Yes, they're great.
Kind of nitpicky, nerdy disagreements. I suspect that they'll come back for the black metal episode. Also.
That's what you need. You need that. You need friends who disagree with you and put you in your place if it's ever needed.
Yeah, keep you on your toes.
That's it.
Exactly.
That's why I keep Mathias around. Simon, where can people find you? I guess if there's anything you want to share, I don't know if you're out there that much social media wise, or if you keep yourself to yourself.
Well, I am relatively active on Twitter. I can write my handle in the chat if you are so inclined. Otherwise, I can write a link to my homepage about the runic poetry project I'm doing. Not much on there yet, but some. Mm-hmm. And if you're into runic black metal, then I can write you a link for my band.
Okay.
You can find Wulfaz on Instagram, right?
Yes, Wulfaz is on Instagram, on Facebook as well, I believe. Not much happening because COVID and stuff, and the world is burning. But we're keeping busy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
yeah. Well, all the links will be in the show notes. So everybody listening, just hit the little expand description button, I guess, and it will reveal all.
Great, and thanks, Kelly. I much appreciate that.
There you go. Mathias, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram. You're welcome to follow me there. Look at what I'm up to. Follow my stories about, shoveling snow.
Listening to Russian techno.
Listening to Russian techno is also a thing that happens once in a while. And other random shit. And of course, you should also go and support the Nordic Mythology podcast on Patreon. Mm-hmm. Sign up for that and get one extra free. Well, it's not free. One extra episode every week. And
don't be saying it's free. Instead,
no, it's not free. It's
that's the whole purpose of Patreon.
That is the whole purpose of Patreon. You will be supporting us so that we can support Shan in his awesome work and general life situation by paying him money for doing all the editing of all our ramblings.
And I love how we always use Shan as the excuse because we have no confidence in our own abilities. Though we don't feel that we deserve any money for the time we spend on the podcast. So we purposefully always go, give us money so we can give Shan Shan the money from the podcast because he works really hard. I mean, we do work hard as well. I feel we deserve a cup of coffee from it.
We do, yes. We're definitely deserving of at least a cup of coffee.
At least a cup of no. The lowest Patreon amount is literally the price of buying us a cup of coffee. Well, one of us a cup of coffee a month. The middle amount is like buying us both one a month. So it's not expensive, but it really does help us out. Helps us keep growing the show. And like Mathias said, you get a free, not free. Fuck, why do I keep saying free? You get a bonus episode every week. One episode is a Q&A where we get you basically, as a patron, you get to ask Mathias anything, just things that maybe we've missed in an episode. A burning question you've had doesn't have to be related to the latest episode either. It can be literally anything. You can ask Mathias and he's going to answer it in detail. And then the other bonus episode is story time with Jonas Lorentzen, where we read a saga. Jonas comes on and narrates the saga. It's always a good time. He has various different voices for different characters. And we go through the sagas and discuss. It's a lot of fun. And other than that, leave us a 5-star rating, positive review wherever you listen to podcasts, and Nordic Mythology Podcast and all the social medias. I think that's everything.
There we go.
We're done. We're out.